The Galactic Prosperity Coalition had, over the course of 17,000 standard cycles, perfected the art of determining which species deserved a seat at the big kids' table. Their methodology was, they believed, flawless. Drop a group of primitives into a controlled environment, watch them fumble through basic survival tasks, then graciously extend membership to those who managed not to accidentally poison themselves within the first week. It was all very scientific, very ethical, and very, very boring. The testing commission had evaluated 473 species using this system. 473 species had been placed in carefully calibrated biodomes with pre-selected challenges, monitored by 17 layers of safety protocols, and guided by subtle interventions when things got too dangerous. The Commission took pride in their work. They were, after all, bringing civilization to the uncivilized, order to chaos, and premium health insurance to species who still thought leeches were valid medical treatment. Humanity's turn came on an unremarkable Thursday, Galactic Standard Time. The Commission had selected planet Verdanis 7, a pleasant forest world with moderate challenges, some large predators, edible vegetation and weather patterns that could charitably be described as moody but manageable. The biodome was prepped, the monitoring systems activated, and the observation team settled in with their refreshments. This would be, they assured each other, entirely routine. The universe, as it turns out, has a sense of humor that borders on malicious. The transport ship carrying 30 human test subjects encountered what the pilot later described as a mathematically improbable series of catastrophic failures. What this meant, in practical terms, was that instead of gently depositing the humans in Biodome Section 4A, the ship performed an unscheduled atmospheric entry at entirely the wrong coordinates, executed several maneuvers that violated at least 4 laws of physics, and crashed spectacularly into Zone 9F. Zone 9F was not part of the testing area. Zone 9F was specifically marked on Commission charts as absolutely not. Are you insane? Nothing goes there. It was a jungle so hostile that the survey team had needed trauma counseling after their 3-hour flyover. The Commission had classified it as a geological hazard and moved on with their lives. The humans, unconscious and strapped into their crash couches, had just moved in. When the test subjects regained consciousness, they found themselves in what could only be described as nature's personal vendetta against the concept of life. The trees were less vegetation and more architectural nightmares, soaring 200 meters into a canopy so thick that sunlight arrived pre-filtered through 17 shades of ominous green. The undergrowth pulsed with bioluminescence that helpfully indicated which plants were merely poisonous versus actively carnivorous. The air itself seemed angry, thick with moisture, and carrying sounds that suggested every creature within hearing distance was either eating something or planning to. The first human to speak was a former wilderness guide named Marcus, who had survived 3 seasons in Alaska and thought he had seen it all. He stared at a flower the size of a refrigerator that was clearly tracking his movement and said, with admirable calm, "Well, this is aggressively terrible." This sentiment was immediately validated when the flower lunged. The Commission, meanwhile, was experiencing what their director would later describe as a significant operational irregularity. Their monitoring systems had lost contact with the test subjects. Their transport beacon was transmitting from coordinates that made the navigation computer produce an error message that roughly translated to "You cannot be serious." Their observation drones, dispatched to locate the humans, were systematically disappearing into the jungle with their last transmissions, showing disturbing images of tentacles, teeth, and what appeared to be an extremely territorial tree. "They're dead," announced the junior observer, with the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong because they had never been right enough times to establish a pattern. Nothing survives in Zone 9F. We should begin composing the apology to their home world. The senior observer, a being whose species had invented pessimism and then perfected it over 6,000 years, was inclined to agree. Protocol suggested waiting 72 hours before declaring test subjects deceased, but protocol had been written by optimists. In the jungle, the humans were making different plans, primarily because dying wasn't on anyone's schedule, and they were all remarkably stubborn about keeping appointments. The first week was, by any objective measure, absolutely miserable. The jungle operated on the principle that everything was either poisonous, predatory, or both, with a special third category reserved for things that were poisonous and predatory while also being on fire. The humans learned quickly that the rain came in two varieties: regular water that fell on even-numbered days, and something that burned exposed skin on Tuesdays. Gravity had opinions that changed based on proximity to certain types of rock. The local wildlife included six-legged cats that hunted in packs, flying serpents that spat acid with concerning accuracy, and something in the undergrowth that screamed like a dying child, but turned out to be a mating call, which was somehow worse. Any sensible species would have panicked. Any rational group would have spent their remaining hours in existential despair, possibly composing final messages or making peace with their various deities. The humans got annoyed. There was something about the sheer audacity of the jungle's hostility that offended them on a personal level. It wasn't enough that they had crashed in the worst possible location. The environment seemed to take active pleasure in their discomfort. This was, the group consensus determined, absolutely unacceptable. If the jungle wanted them dead, it would have to work considerably harder. The park ranger, Marcus, treated the carnivorous plants like particularly unruly dogs that needed firm boundaries. When a vine thing attempted to grab him, he grabbed it back and used it to pull himself up to a tree branch, which confused the plant enough that it retreated to rethink its life choices. An engineer named Kenji, who had spent 15 years designing earthquake-resistant structures, looked at the massive trees and saw not threats but opportunities. The wood was strong, the branches thick enough to build on, and if they went high enough, most of the ground-based predators couldn't reach them. "We're going up," he announced, with the tone of someone who had decided that physics was more guideline than rule. A chef called Dmitri, who had worked in restaurants where the customers were more dangerous than any wildlife, established the group's food philosophy with admirable directness. "If it tries to eat us, we eat it first. This is how we establish dominance." The first base was less architecture and more defiant middle finger to biology. 50 meters up, where the branches formed a relatively stable platform, they lashed together a structure using salvaged materials from the crash and wood harvested from trees they had personally offended. It was ugly, probably violated several engineering codes, and swayed alarmingly in strong winds. It was also 50 meters above the things that wanted to eat them, which made it prime real estate. The Commission's long-range scanners, when they finally penetrated the jungle's interference, detected the structure and immediately assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. The readings suggested organized construction in an environment that should only contain decomposing remains. They ran diagnostics 3 times before accepting that something was building things in Zone 9F, though whether that something was human remained unclear. By month 2, the humans had expanded from 1 platform to 7, connected by a network of rope bridges that turned 3-dimensional movement into standard procedure. They had learned the jungle's rhythms through trial, error, and several incidents that were now referred to only as the Tuesday situation and never discussed in detail. Water collection became systematic. They built catchment systems that filtered the safe rain and stored it in containers made from hollowed sections of a tree species that, while aggressive, was at least consistently aggressive and therefore predictable. Someone discovered that earth seeds, carried by a botanist who had packed them for reasons she described as optimistic paranoia, actually grew in the alien soil. Not well, and not without significant effort, but the plants that survived were hardy enough to handle an environment that treated photosynthesis as optional. The resulting farms were small, chaotic, and produced vegetables that looked like they had survivor's guilt, but they were food that wouldn't try to eat them back, which was a considerable improvement. The pulley system was Kenji's masterpiece, a contraption of ropes, counterweights, and salvaged ship components that shouldn't have worked but did so anyway out of what could only be described as spite. It allowed them to move supplies between platforms without risking the ground level, where the six-legged cats had established that humans were crunchy and probably tasted interesting. They named everything that threatened them, because giving something a stupid name made it less terrifying. The acid-spitting serpents became Jeff, collectively, because they all looked the same and were equally irritating. The screaming undergrowth creatures were the choir. The carnivorous plants got individual names based on which human they had most recently attempted to murder. There was a therapeutic quality to yelling "Not today, Barbara," while avoiding floral assassination attempts. The Commission's monitoring team watched their scanner data with increasing confusion. The organized structures were multiplying. Energy signatures suggested fire use, which implied tool creation. Movement patterns indicated established routes and regular activity cycles. Either the humans had survived, which was impossible, or Zone 9F had developed a civilization of its own, which was more impossible, but somehow seemed more likely. The Canopy Empire, as absolutely no one called it except in sarcastic internal monologue, grew through necessity and human stubbornness in equal measure. The humans had mapped the territory within a 2-kilometer radius, which was impressive considering the mapping process involved avoiding death on a near-constant basis. They identified which predators were territorial versus which ones were ambitious enough to climb. They learned that certain trees secreted a sap that the flying serpents avoided, and began coating their bridges with it. The supply routes were established through observation and opportunism. The six-legged cats hunted in the early morning and late evening, but rested during midday. The flying serpents avoided the western section, where a particular species of tree-dwelling insect had claimed territory and would attack anything with wings. By moving during specific time windows and following paths that exploited these behavioral patterns, the humans created safe-ish corridors through an environment designed to kill them. Communication between platforms evolved from yelling to a drum system that worked because it annoyed the local fauna enough that they stayed away from the noise. The rhythm patterns developed their own language. 3 short beats meant predator alert, 2 long beats called for assistance, and 1 continuous roll meant someone had found food, possibly still living. Supply caches were hidden in hollowed tree trunks along the routes, stocked with water, dried rations, and weapons that ranged from salvaged ship tools to sharpened branches that had been fire-hardened. The caches were marked with carved symbols that meant nothing to the jungle's inhabitants, but everything to humans trying not to get lost and subsequently eaten. What surprised everyone, including the humans themselves, was the development of social order without anyone officially being in charge. Democratic chaos emerged as the governing system, not through planning but through the simple reality that when everyone might die tomorrow, today's decisions required everyone's input. They held meetings on the central platform, which had become the de facto town square through process of elimination and the fact that it had the most space. Meetings were held while someone kept watch for Jeff, because the serpents had learned that gathered humans meant potential meals and had started showing up like uninvited dinner guests. Decisions were made by consensus when possible, majority vote when necessary, and executive action when something was actively trying to kill them and democracy needed to wait. Job rotations meant everyone learned multiple skills because specialization was a luxury they couldn't afford. The engineer learned to cook because Dimitri needed help processing the local fauna into something edible. The botanist learned construction because extra hands meant faster building. Marcus taught everyone wilderness survival, which mostly involved lectures on which things would kill them quickly versus slowly. Rules emerged organically, enforced by mutual agreement and the understanding that violations could get everyone killed. No hoarding supplies because everyone needed access. No taking unnecessary risks because rescue capacity was limited. If someone discovered a new way to die, documentation was mandatory so others could avoid that particular mistake. The rule book, carved into a section of bark, grew weekly. No touching the blue mushrooms had been added after someone touched the blue mushrooms and spent 3 days convinced they could talk to colors. Check your boots for stabby things before wearing came after an incident involving a small creature that liked dark spaces and had a terrible attitude. Dimitri has final say on food safety was established after the poisoning incident that nobody discussed but everyone remembered. The commission, 4 months behind schedule and drowning in paperwork explaining the delay, finally mounted a rescue operation. They equipped a team with environmental suits, weapons, medical supplies, and enough redundant safety systems to protect against everything their database listed as threats for Zone 9F. The team leader had volunteered for the mission, viewing it as a recovery operation rather than rescue, but someone had to retrieve the bodies for proper documentation. The rescue ship descended through the canopy with sensors active, expecting to find crash site remains and maybe some scattered belongings. What they found instead caused the pilot to perform an unscheduled hover, while the team leader radioed back to confirm that yes, their scanners were functioning correctly, and no, they hadn't accidentally ingested hallucinogens. Below them spread a village. An actual, organized, thoroughly lived-in village suspended in the canopy like someone had taken human civilization and decided gravity was optional. Multiple platforms connected by rope bridges, storage structures, what appeared to be farming installations, and in the center, a gathering area where humans were visible going about daily activities as if they hadn't crashed in a death zone designed by a sadistic universe. The rescue team landed on the central platform, weapons ready for hostile wildlife. What they encountered instead was 30 humans in various states of working on projects, several of whom looked up with the annoyed expression of people interrupted during important tasks. One human, stirring something in a pot over a controlled fire, actually sighed. "You're late," Dimitri said, with the exhausted patience of someone who had stopped expecting punctuality from the universe. "We held dinner, but it's cold now. You want some? It's local. Very local. Still getting used to the tentacle texture, but the flavor is acceptable." The team leader, a being whose species prided itself on adaptability and crisis management, stood in absolute silence while their brain attempted to process the disconnect between expected reality and observed circumstances. They had prepared for corpses, survivors clinging to life, maybe desperate humans who would weep with relief at rescue. They had not prepared for a thriving community offering dinner with critiques about texture. "You've been here 4 months, the team leader finally managed. In Zone 9F, which is classified as unsurvivable. The classification system needs updating," Marcus said, walking past while carrying lumber. "We've survived fine, built infrastructure, established governance, created supply lines. The jungle's dangerous but manageable if you pay attention and don't do anything stupid. Also, don't touch the blue mushrooms. That's in the rule book. The rescue team deployed their medical scanners, certain they would find malnutrition, disease, psychological trauma, something that explained how humans could exist in these conditions. The scans came back showing healthy individuals, some with minor injuries but nothing serious, stress levels elevated but within normal parameters for the situation, and zero signs of the catastrophic health problems expected from Zone 9F exposure. "This is impossible," the junior rescue technician said, with the confidence of someone whose education was being contradicted by observable reality. "Yeah, we get that a lot," replied Kenji, who was calculating load capacities for a new platform expansion. "But here we are anyway. Reality doesn't care about impossibility. Also, you're standing in the Jeff zone. Might want to move before evening." The rescue that nobody wanted became a negotiation nobody expected. The humans were willing to leave but wanted time to pack their belongings, dismantle sensitive equipment, and document their infrastructure for records. They treated evacuation like moving from an apartment, complete with debates about what counted as essential items and whether they could take the cooking pot that had served them well. The Commission's crisis began before the rescue ship even left Verdenis 7. The team leader's report caused the equivalent of bureaucratic cardiac arrest across multiple departments. Humans had not only survived Zone 9F, but had thrived in conditions that killed most tested species within days. They had built civilization in an environment the Commission had written off as geologically hazardous. They had established social order without apparent hierarchy, created infrastructure with salvaged materials, and developed supply networks through terrain that required advanced survival skills just to traverse without dying. The testing commission faced an unprecedented dilemma. The trial was supposed to measure basic survival capabilities, finding food, creating shelter, demonstrating social cooperation. Humanity had exceeded every metric, but not in the approved testing zone. They had survived the wrong environment, built the wrong type of structures, and succeeded at the wrong difficulty level. The test was designed to be challenging but passable. What the humans had accomplished was like showing up for a driving test and accidentally flying a helicopter through an obstacle course while maintaining perfect traffic law compliance. Did they pass? The humans had demonstrated advanced survival skills and social organization. Did they fail? They had been in entirely the wrong location due to circumstances beyond their control. Did the test even count? The Commission's legal department generated 17 different interpretations, none of which satisfied anyone. Emergency meetings were convened. Experts were consulted. Precedent was searched with increasing desperation. One Commission member suggested creating a new category specifically for humanity, passed through excessive competence in incorrect environment. Another proposed simply pretending the entire incident never happened and scheduling a proper test. A third, who had personally reviewed the footage of humans building rope bridges while dodging acid-spitting serpents, suggested that maybe humanity didn't need testing and the Commission should just approve membership before the humans decided the application process was too annoying and solved that problem with characteristic directness. The debate escalated until the Commission's director, who had overseen 473 successful evaluations, made an executive decision. Humanity passed, not because they had completed the intended test, but because any species capable of turning Zone 9F into a livable environment while maintaining social order and even developing infrastructure was clearly capable of handling the responsibilities of coalition membership. Also, and this was left unspoken but understood, Denying membership to a species that had just demonstrated they could thrive in conditions that terrified trained researchers seemed like an excellent way to create a diplomatic incident. The official report was filed under exceptional circumstances with a classification level that ensured very few beings would ever read the full details. Verdenis 7, specifically Zone 9F, was quietly reclassified from geological hazard to unsuitable for life under any circumstances. Do not even fly over it. We're serious this time. The Testing Commission updated their protocols to include triple redundant transport systems and backup landing coordinates, because explaining one catastrophic crash to a primitive species was embarrassing enough. Humanity's trial results were published in the required public records because transparency was important to the coalition even when it was deeply inconvenient. Other species read the summary with expressions ranging from disbelief to horror. The humans had done what in where and built functioning what while being attacked by how many predators. Several species formally requested their own test results be sealed because comparison was psychologically damaging. The 30 test subjects returned to Earth as minor celebrities, doing interviews where they undersold their accomplishments with phrases like, "It wasn't that bad," and "You just adapt to the circumstances," while showing pictures of the Canopy village that made wilderness survival experts quietly reconsider their career choices. They were asked repeatedly what their secret was. How had they survived when they should have died? What special training or technology had enabled their success? Marcus, speaking for the group during a coalition press conference, provided an answer that was simultaneously honest and completely unhelpful. "We were really annoyed about the whole situation, so we decided not to die about it. Also, spite is extremely motivating. You'd be surprised what humans can accomplish when we're collectively irritated." The galaxy processed this explanation with the discomfort of species who had built civilizations on philosophy, honor, logic, and other lofty principles, discovering that humanity's driving force was apparently aggressive stubbornness mixed with social irritation. It didn't fit existing models of species development. It wasn't particularly inspiring. It was, however, disturbingly effective. The Testing Commission, having survived the bureaucratic nightmare of humanity's evaluation, returned to their normal routine of processing species through carefully controlled environments where nothing unexpected could happen. They had learned valuable lessons about transport redundancy, backup systems, and the importance of triple-checking landing coordinates. They had not learned, because the lesson was too disturbing to fully process, that sometimes the species being tested were considerably more capable than the species doing the testing. Civilization trials, the Commission maintained, were still necessary for bringing order to primitive species, guiding them toward proper social development, and ensuring they possessed the basic capabilities required for coalition membership. The system was refined, professional, and built on 17,000 cycles of experience. It was also, as humanity had inadvertently demonstrated, somewhat pointless when the species being evaluated could look at a nightmare jungle designed by a hostile universe, shrug collectively, and build a functioning society, because dying seemed inconvenient, and they had better things to do with their time. But acknowledging that would require the Commission to reconsider their entire purpose, and bureaucracies were far too evolved for that kind of existential flexibility. Humanity joined the coalition with full membership, voting rights, and a reputation that preceded them like a warning label. They were the species that survived the unsurvivable through spite and social organization. They were the beings who looked at impossible challenges and got annoyed enough to solve them. They were, the galaxy slowly realized, exactly the kind of problem-solving, stubbornly persistent allies you wanted when things got difficult, and exactly the kind of rivals you hoped never got irritated enough to consider you part of the problem. And somewhere on Verdenis 7, in the canopy of Zone 9F, A rope bridge swayed in the wind, connecting platforms that shouldn't exist in an environment hostile to life itself, serving as a monument to the most human of principles. If the universe says you can't do something, the appropriate response is to do it anyway, and then complain about the inconvenience.